Dynasty star Phil Robertson has passed away at the age of 79.
Duck Dynasty's Phil Robertson leaves behind a fortune that makes his family cry. Nothing could have truly prepared them for the grief, but even more, nothing could have prepared them for the powerful legacy Phil Robertson left behind, meticulously recorded in his own hand. The final chapter of a life defined by toughness, unyielding faith, and conviction. In the months leading up to May 2025, Phil's health began to deteriorate sharply, a decline that left his children emotionally unready. The man they had always known as unshakable, the man who had braved storms, preached with unwavering conviction, and built a life by his own code, was now slowly slipping away, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. When the family revealed in December 2024 that Phil had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, many fans assumed it would be a slow, gradual change. But inside the Robertson home, the reality was far harsher, far more immediate. The disease struck with a speed and ferocity that no one expected. It eroded not just his memory, but his physical strength as well. At first, the signs were subtle. A misplaced object here, a question repeated there, a pause lingering in the middle of a conversation, small enough to dismiss or at least try to. But as time went on, the forgetfulness deepened, creeping into moments of complete disorientation. Phil would sometimes forget what day it was, or start a story only to lose his words halfway through. Each slip, small at first, grew heavier with dread. The man who had endured decades of controversy, built an empire with his own hands, and lived life boldly on his terms, was now facing a battle he could not control. By April 2025, the situation could no longer remain private. On an episode of the Unashamed podcast, Jace spoke openly, his voice weighed down with a mixture of honesty, worry, and heartbreak. "He's not good," he admitted. "We're making him comfortable." Simple words, yet they carried the weight of months of silent suffering. Phil Robertson, the patriarch, the steadfast leader, the unshakable voice of faith and tradition, was fading. His body weakened, even the simplest daily routines now demanded assistance. His once powerful voice, firm and commanding, softened, leaving him exhausted after even brief conversation. Alzheimer's was stealing more than his memory, it was touching every part of him. Yet in the midst of this decline, Phil carried a remarkable calm. Death had always been a subject he approached with certainty rather than fear. "Don't cry when I die," he told his children. "Dance, sing, but don't cry." Those words became a family mantra, a final lesson in grace and resilience, even if, in truth, no one could fully live up to it. When the final day arrived, even the strongest among them found it impossible to obey. In the quiet, gentle hours of May 25, 2025, Phil passed away at home, surrounded by the love of his family. He was 79, and though his body was gone, the legacy he left, the faith, the courage, the unwavering voice remained, etched forever in memory and in the pages he had written himself. Silence hung over the room like a heavy, unshakable fog, pressing down on everyone in a way words could never describe. Every breath felt thick with grief, every glance loaded with unspoken sorrow. Finally, the first voice broke the quiet. Jace stepped forward, his face a mix of composure and heartbreak, and spoke the words everyone had been dreading, yet waiting for. "My dad has gone to be with the Lord today." Simple, understated, but in that moment, those words struck with the force of a hammer, piercing hearts, catching throats, leaving a raw ache in the chest of everyone present. Not long after, Willie and Corey followed, their voices heavy but steady. Each word carried a strange mixture of sorrow and gratitude, like a delicate balance between mourning a loss and cherishing a lifetime of memories. They reminded everyone that while grief was inevitable, the memories Phil had left behind were treasures, moments of laughter, lessons taught, and love shared that no one could ever take away. The funeral itself was exactly the farewell Phil would have wanted, quiet, personal, and untouched by the outside world. There were no reporters lingering, no cameras intruding, no politicians angling for attention. It was just family, just friends, and a silence so profound it could only have been shaped by decades of shared life. Together they prayed, together they remembered, together they tried, some more successfully than others, not to cry. But the love they held for Phil was far too strong, and even the most stoic eyes betrayed tears that refused to be contained. Yet if the funeral was heavy, it was nothing compared to what came afterwards. The true reckoning happened later, inside a quiet lawyer's office, when the family gathered to hear Phil's final words, his will, his instructions, and the handwritten letters he had left behind. The moment the envelopes were opened, the reality of Phil's careful planning hit like a tidal wave. Tears long held back flowed freely. Hearts already fragile from the funeral shattered again. Phil's last days had not just been about saying goodbye, they had been about preparing his family to carry on without him, to live and thrive while still feeling his guidance. The reading of Phil Robertson's will took place behind closed doors in West Monroe the day after the funeral, and what unfolded stunned everyone present. In that room were Miss Kay, his beloved wife of more than 50 years, his sons Alan, Jace, Willie, and Jep, and Phyllis, the daughter he had discovered later in life but embraced without hesitation. What everyone expected to be a straightforward division of assets turned into something far more intimate, deeply personal, and unforgettable. Phil had left each family member a handwritten letter. No typed documents, no polished statements, just his own uneven, trembling handwriting, scarred by illness, yet unmistakably his own. These were not just letters about money, they were confessions, blessings, apologies, and life advice, words meant to guide, heal, and shape the futures of the people he loved most. Each envelope was a roadmap, carrying not just a piece of his estate, but a part of his heart, his reasoning, and his hopes for how each person could continue his legacy. Every line connected past, present, and future in ways no fortune ever could. Phil's wealth, estimated between $10 million and $15 million, was the result of decades of tireless work, from Duck Commander and Duck Dynasty to books, licensing, podcasts, and speaking engagements. But the real shock wasn't in the numbers, it was in the meaning behind every dollar, every allocation. Miss Kay, his partner through thick and thin, received full ownership of the family estate, the home and land they had built together. From the early days of living off whatever the swamp provided, to decades spent growing a dynasty and a life full of love, every brick, every corner, every memory belonged to her. And in that gesture, Phil didn't just leave an inheritance, he left a legacy, a promise, and a love that would continue to shape his family long after he was gone. Alan, once a pastor, found himself suddenly entrusted with Phil Robertson's most intimate legacy, the lifelong collection of religious writings that shaped a man, a family, and a movement. Jace and Jep didn't just inherit a share in a business, they were handed a sacred charge to guard the traditions of Duck Commander exactly as Phil had decreed, a responsibility heavier than any paycheck. Phyllis, long haunted by questions about the father she barely knew, finally received something far more meaningful than money: land and a handwritten apology, a tangible key to the years she had spent longing for connection. And Willie, the son who would carry Duck Commander from the hidden swamps into the heart of mainstream America, walked away not just with the controlling stake, but with a solemn command from his father: protect the faith, protect the legacy. When the file envelope was opened, tears didn't fall for the fortune. They fell for the weight of history, for the swamp-born legacy that had survived decades of struggle and triumph. To truly understand why Phil Robertson's will struck so hard, the family and the world watching had to go back to where it all began. Long before television cameras captured the humor, the chaos and the prayers, before the books, tours and national fame, Phil Robertson was simply a boy in Louisiana, poor and determined, fighting for survival in a world that offered little but the land itself. Born in 1946, Phil grew up where hunting wasn't a hobby, it was the line between hunger and fullness. Meals were uncertain, depending entirely on what could be caught in the swamp. Those early years forged a man who was tough, independent, and fiercely protective of his freedom. Every hardship deepened a skepticism for anything that threatened to pull him away from the land he loved, the swamps that shaped his heart and soul. But Phil's story was more than survival. It was talent shining through grit. His athletic ability earned him a football scholarship to Louisiana Tech, where he became the starting quarterback in 1966 and 1967. His backup, none other than Terry Bradshaw, destined for NFL legend. And yet, despite what many would call a golden opportunity, Phil walked away from football. Not for money, not for fame, but for ducks. He said, "I'd rather hunt ducks than have large, violent men stomp me in the dirt," his humor masking a defiance that would define his life. That choice wasn't just funny, it was the foundation of his identity. Freedom mattered more than fortune. By 1972, Phil transformed that love of freedom into a small, homegrown business. Duck Commander began as a one-man operation, Phil carving each duck call with his own hands and shipping them one at a time. Miss Kay, pregnant at 17 and raising children, never wavered, standing beside him through years that were hand-to-mouth, faith-to-faith, relying on the bayou and sheer determination to keep them afloat. The business grew slowly at first, but steadily, until Willie returned from college with a vision that would catapult Duck Commander into the national spotlight. That empire, multi-million-dollar and worldwide, was rooted not in luck, but in poverty, sacrifice, faith, and unshakable family loyalty. And that is precisely why Phil Robertson's will landed with such profound weight. They were more than instructions. They were a reminder of a life carved from swamps, grit, and devotion, a legacy none of them could ever take lightly. Every child who received money from the Robertson family wasn't just handed cash, they were inheriting a story, one painstakingly stitched together across generations. Fame, controversy, and the stubborn defiance of a man who refused to bend to the world around him can't be understood without first seeing Phil Robertson through the murky swamps of Louisiana and the trials of his early marriage. That life, hard, raw, unfiltered, shaped the man who would soon become a cultural lightning rod. The public first met him in 2012 when Duck Dynasty exploded onto A&E screens. What was meant to be a simple reality show about a family running a duck call business unexpectedly became a phenomenon that no one saw coming. At its peak, more than 11 million viewers tuned in every week, hanging on every blunt, unapologetic truth he spoke about faith, family, and discipline. This wasn't acting. This wasn't scripted reality TV. This was Phil, unfiltered in full form. And while fame often softens people, for Phil it did the opposite. It amplified him. But fame came with fire. In 2013, a GQ interview ignited one of the fiercest controversies of his life, debates that would haunt him for years.
Phil Robertson got in trouble last week for talking about vaginas and anuses. He told GQ magazine, "It seems like, to me, a vagina."
Phil spoke with unflinching honesty, so raw, so shocking to some, that it seemed almost impossible to stomach. He expressed his views on homosexuality and race, claiming gay relationships defied God's design and asserting that Black Americans had been content under Jim Crow. The backlash was immediate, explosive. A&E suspended him, advertisers recoiled, civil rights groups demanded apologies. Yet, conservatives rallied behind him like never before. Hashtags supporting Phil went viral. Duck Commander merchandise flew off shelves, and within weeks, public pressure forced A&E to reinstate him. Through it all, Phil refused to bend. He never apologized, holding fast that his beliefs came directly from Scripture. Over the next decade, he became a fixture in conservative politics, endorsing Ted Cruz in 2016, later throwing support behind Donald Trump. To some, he was a symbol of unwavering religious conviction. To others, he was a portrait of intolerance. But Phil remained unmoved, focused only on what he believed God required of him. Behind the cameras, the family wrestled with the weight of fame. Ratings slowly declined, and Duck Dynasty concluded in 2017 after 11 seasons. Spin-offs followed: Cyril, Jeep, and Jessica at Home with the Robertsons, Duck Family Treasure, keeping the family legacy alive, but never replacing the man at its center. Then, in January 2025, A&E announced the revival of Duck Dynasty, set to showcase the next generation. But Phil would be absent, taken too much by Alzheimer's. Yet even in absence, his presence lingered, an invisible backbone holding up the entire franchise. His convictions, his controversies, his relentless choices, they had built a fortune, but they also left a weighty inheritance for the family. Behind the wealth, behind the faith, behind the failures and the moments of redemption, there was the man himself. Long before the world knew Phil Robertson, he was a man teetering on the edge of losing everything. And it was that very edge, the edge of faith, family, and defiance, that defined everything to come. Few fans ever glimpsed the storm that raged behind the cameras on Duck Dynasty, the years that nearly tore Phil Robertson's family apart. In his 20s and early 30s, Phil was consumed by darkness, alcohol, violence, and a temper so fierce it left permanent scars on his marriage. Kay, just 17 when she married him after discovering she was pregnant, held their home together with nothing but sheer strength, quiet tears, and relentless prayer. Phil later admitted in interviews that he would disappear for days, lost in heavy drinking and reckless choices, leaving their family terrified of what might come next or if he would return at all. The Life household teetered on a knife's edge, until one day, in a small, unassuming church in West Monroe, everything changed. Phil walked in restless, defiant, skeptical. He walked out a new man. That day, Christianity gripped him with a force so powerful, so undeniable, that it reshaped every choice, every action, every word he would speak from that moment onward. From that day forward, Phil rebuilt his marriage, repaired his relationships with his children, and threw himself into his work, provision, and teachings. His faith didn't just save him, it transformed the entire Robertson family. Every corner of their lives, from the family business to Phil's books, speeches, and the Unashamed podcast with Jason Al, was infused with purpose. There was a new energy, a new direction, and an unmistakable authenticity that fans felt even through the TV screen.
On the podcast, Phil spoke exactly as he lived, blunt, unapologetic, and rooted firmly in Scripture. Even in his final months, as Alzheimer's slowly claimed parts of him, his voice remained startlingly clear. Listeners were shocked, unable to reconcile the steady, piercing clarity of his words with the reports of his children, who watched the disease gradually erode the man they knew. His convictions never wavered, his faith never faltered. This is the Phil Robertson his family chose to honor in his will. Not the millionaire, not the television star, but the man who rose from his own failures, who spent decades walking the path he preached, imperfect but devoted. The fortune he left was tangible, yes, but the redemption, the grace, the years of transformation behind it, that's what moved his family to tears. His farewell marked the quiet close of an era. As they absorbed the weight of his will, another truth settled in. Phil Robertson's passing wasn't just the loss of a father, a husband, or a celebrity. It was the end of a generation. He belonged to a time, a culture that feels almost extinct. Self-made Southern entrepreneurs who built everything with their own hands, trusted God above all else, and resisted the pull of modern culture. Phil Robertson's life, in all its chaos, pain, and eventual triumph, was a testament to that world, and its passing leaves a silence that will be felt for years to come. The final chapter of the Robertson era closed quietly yet profoundly with Phil Robertson's passing. Across America, fans had been bracing for this moment ever since his Alzheimer's diagnosis went public in December 2024. But even with warning, the speed of his decline inside the family shocked everyone. By early April 2025, Jace shared a heartfelt update on Unashamed. Phil is not doing well. We're making him comfortable and doing the best we can. Those words gave the public a rare window into the private struggle that had been unfolding behind closed doors. Even as his health waned, Phil's voice remained steadfast. He managed to record a few final episodes of his podcast, and remarkably, his words sounded almost untouched by the disease. Each recording now carries the weight of a man who always spoke with conviction, leaving behind what feels like a carefully crafted farewell, a final message from the heart of Phil Robertson himself. When the family gathered for the private funeral on May 25, 2025, it was clear that this was Phil on his terms. No cameras, no politicians, no celebrities, just his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and a handful of locals who had known him long before fame ever knocked on the Robertson door. The ceremony was a tapestry of grief and love. Tears mingled with laughter. Bible readings echoed through quiet moments, and there were pauses heavy with the weight of shared memories. Even amid sorrow, the family stepped forward to carry Phil's legacy. Willie assumed the role of majority owner at Duck Commander. Jace poured himself into continuing the podcast. Jep embraced his part of the family business. And A&E prepared Duck Dynasty: The Revival, premiering in the summer of 2025. The first season without Phil physically present, yet filled with his enduring influence. Phil's letters in his will were not about money. They were about identity. They reminded the family of who they were, where they came from, and what values he expected them to uphold above all else. The tears shed were not just for a fortune lost. They were for the weight of responsibility, for love, for a legacy far bigger than wealth or fame. What stands out most from Phil Robertson's final message to you? How does it resonate with your own sense of family, faith, or legacy? Share your thoughts below and honor the man who left a mark far deeper than the cameras ever could.